The screen shudders with the sound of static. A radio hisses, voices breaking through the interference like ghosts clawing at the air. Floodlights cut through a storm of desert dust, generators hum like restless beasts, and soldiers move in and out of a cramped command tent. But among the chaos, there's someone different. A woman in fatigues crouches by a battered comms rack, sleeves rolled, her fingers blackened with grease. At her side lie not weapons, not metals, but a neat spread of tools and wires. She isn't shouting orders. She isn't carrying a rifle. She looks to most like just another technician keeping the radios alive. But tonight, one word, a word spoken by the wrong man at the right moment, will tear the disguise off her quiet life and force her past to the surface. That word is ma'am. And with it, the ghost of a name no one in the room had ever expected to hear again. Captain Sarah Donovan, the Falcon. The desert night clung heavy over the forward operating base. Floodlights carved shallow circles into the dust, but beyond them lay nothing but shadows. Inside the main tent, tension rippled like a current. Maps were spread across tables, radios spat static, and tempers ran hot. A special operations team had gone deep behind enemy lines. Their only lifeline was the battered radio rack shoved against the wall, and right now, that lifeline was dead. "Where's the damn comms tech?" a sergeant barked, slamming his palm on the table. "We're blind out there." Curses echoed around him, frustration mounting. From the corner of the tent, a woman rose quietly. She wasn't tall, not imposing. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense knot, her face plain under the harsh fluorescent light. Most soldiers hardly noticed her. She kept to herself, always working, never speaking unless necessary. She picked up her toolkit, knelt beside the rack, and without a word began to work. Her fingers moved with precision, unclipping wires, swapping circuits, recalibrating dials. Sweat rolled across her temple, catching the light, but her expression never faltered. For 10 long minutes she fought the stubborn equipment, drowning out the storm of voices behind her. And then, a crackle. The radio came alive, sharp and clear. "Team Bravo in position, awaiting orders." Relief swept through the tent. Shoulders dropped, curses turned to sighs. The sergeant exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. The woman, Sarah, leaned back on her heels, wiped her hands with a rag, and started to gather her tools. Her job was done. She was ready to melt back into the shadows, just as always. But then, "Ma'am!" The single word sliced through the air. Every head turned. A Navy SEAL lieutenant stood stiff at attention, his eyes locked on her. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in a perfect salute. Confusion rippled through the room. A salute? To a comms tech? Sarah froze. Her spine stiffened. She turned, meeting the lieutenant's gaze. And then, like a blade drawn from a sheath, the word fell from his lips. "Captain Donovan." The tent erupted in whispers. Soldiers glanced at each other, disbelief in their eyes. "Captain? Captain who?" The sergeant who had barked at her earlier shook his head, scoffing. "You've got the wrong woman, Lieutenant. That's just the radio girl." But the lieutenant's voice cut firm, certain. "Now remember her. Operation Iron Tempest. The skies were burning, SAMs everywhere. And then she came, flying that jet like it was alive. She saved us, saved my team." Silence descended like a weight. Sarah closed her eyes, and memories she had buried clawed their way back. The roar of engines, trails of fire streaking the sky, orders to retreat, orders she disobeyed. The night she flew straight into chaos to drag men back from death. Her call sign had once echoed across every channel, Falcon, one of the Navy's most decorated fighter captains, and then she was gone. The soldiers stared, realization dawning. They had mocked her silence, overlooked her presence, dismissed her as just another tech. But the lieutenant's salute, his steady words, stripped the disguise away. The sergeant muttered, "That can't be true." But in the lieutenant's eyes was the kind of certainty only born of memory. "It is." And Sarah knew there was no hiding anymore. She had left the skies because the ghosts were too heavy. The faces of those she couldn't save haunted her every night. She chose the shadows, chose silence. Radios, wires, frequencies. They were easier to face than the cockpit that had once defined her. But the past wasn't done with her. In the days that followed, everything changed. The men no longer looked at her as a quiet background figure. They approached her with questions, with respect. "Ma'am, is it true you flew through a missile storm? Did they really call you Falcon?" At first, Sarah brushed them off. But slowly, bit by bit, she let pieces of her story slip. She told them of midnight sorties, desperate escorts through fire, missions where she flew until her hands bled on the controls. She told them of victories, but also of the losses, the brothers and sisters who never came home. The soldiers listened in silence, and when she finished, they didn't cheer or jeer. They just looked at her differently, with something deeper, respect. Weeks later, after another brutal mission, the SEAL team stumbled back into camp. Their faces were streaked with dirt, their uniforms shredded, but they were alive. Thanks to the radios she kept running. That night, the lieutenant found her alone in the tent, hunched over the equipment as always. He stepped forward, holding something in his hand. Without a word, he placed it in her palm. A frayed SEAL team patch, scarred from combat. "For when you forget who you are," he said softly. Sarah stared at the patch, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. For the first time in years, she smiled, not the quiet, polite smile she wore for strangers, but a real one, alive. The screen fades slowly, her silhouette outlined by the hum of the radio. A voiceover cuts through. Some heroes don't walk with medals on display. They don't shout their names or demand respect. Some heroes hide in silence, fixing wires, keeping lifelines alive. But their courage never fades. Behind the quietest figures often lies a story that once shook the skies. The story ends here, but her legend, the Falcon, lives on in whispers, in salutes, and in the lives of the soldiers who survived because of her.